What if I told you there's a place where time has stood still, where promises remain suspended, waiting for someone brave enough to fulfill them? It was exactly 11:47 p.m. on a cold winter night when Tom Morrison, a janitor who had dedicated 30 years of his life to Boston Memorial Hospital, received an order that would change everything: to empty room 304 of the old West Wing, a forgotten place, abandoned for 15 years, where no one dared to enter. The hospital administration had decided to demolish that historic wing built in 1890, and Tom would be the last human being to set foot in those corridors before the machines turned them into dust and memory. It was just a formality, they told him, a final inspection, nothing serious. But when he pushed open that creaking, rust-covered door, his eyes widened at an impossible, inexplicable, chilling scene. Have you ever felt that chill down your spine that seems to freeze time? There, seated in the chair beside the dusty window, illuminated only by the silvery light of the full moon, was an elderly woman. Her white hair was tied in a delicate bun. She wore a faded blue hospital robe, her hands clasped in her lap as if in deep meditation. She gazed at the night sky with a disturbing serenity. Tom froze. His heart pounded. The hospital was completely empty. That wing had been closed for over a decade. The lights didn't work. The air was heavy with the smell of abandonment. And yet, she was there. Real. Present. Alive. Then something happened that no one could have predicted. The woman turned her face slowly. Her eyes met Tom's, and in a soft voice, heavy with decades of waiting, she whispered the words that would have chilled his blood. "You took so long. I was waiting." Tom felt every hair on his body stand on end. How did she know he was coming? Who was this woman? And why, of all the people in the world, was she waiting for him, a simple janitor, working his last shift at that hospital haunted by the past? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover goes beyond any logical explanation. This is not your average story about an abandoned hospital or urban legends. This is a story about eternal love, broken promises, and the inexplicable power that connects souls across time. This is not your average story about an abandoned hospital or urban legends. This is a story about eternal love, broken promises, and the inexplicable power that connects souls across time. And you know what impresses me most about this story? It makes us question everything we think we know about life, about death, and about the bonds that unite us, even when all seems lost. As I delved into the details of this true story that took place in Boston, I realized that each of us carries unfulfilled promises, unspoken words and hugs that remain suspended in mid-air. Have you ever stopped to think about this? Have you ever felt like you needed to say something important to someone but put it off? Before we continue, I need to ask you something that will make all the difference. If this story is touching your heart, if you feel that there is something greater connecting us here in this moment, leave a comment below telling us, do you believe there is a purpose in the things that happen in our lives? Have you ever experienced something inexplicable that changed the way you see the world? I read every comment personally, and believe me, your stories inspire me to continue bringing this kind of content to you. It's not just about numbers, it's about creating a community of people who believe in the power of real stories, stories that touch the soul and make us reflect on what truly matters. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, click the subscribe button now and turn on notifications. Seriously, your subscription isn't just a click. It's the fuel that keeps this channel alive, that motivates me to research, to write, to bring you exciting stories like this one every week. And if you're enjoying it so far, leave a sincere like, because this helps this video reach other people who also need to hear this message of hope and connection. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more hearts that need to believe that miracles are still happening around us. Now let's go back to room 304, where Tom is face to face with Eleanor, the woman who has waited for him for decades, because what happened after that impossible encounter will leave you speechless. But before you understand the magnitude of this moment, you need to know who Tom Morrison was. He wasn't a prominent man. He didn't have a university degree hanging on the wall. He didn't drive luxury cars. Tom was 52 years old and had worked as a janitor at Boston Memorial Hospital for almost 3 decades. 30 years walking the same corridors, cleaning the same rooms, watching life and death dance in those corridors day after day. He knew every dark corner, every equipment room, every secret those old walls held. He was a man of few words, simple, discreet, one of those who do their work in silence without expecting recognition or applause, the kind of person that society often ignores, but who keeps the world running with dignity and dedication. The hidden truth about people like Tom is that they possess a quiet wisdom, a mindset forged by the constant observation of human nature in its most vulnerable moments. He had witnessed miraculous births in the maternity ward, painful farewells in the intensive care unit, recoveries that defied all medical statistics. Tom wasn't just a janitor, he was a silent witness to the deepest transformations that occur when life brings us to our knees. And perhaps, precisely for that reason, the universe chose him for that impossible mission on that cold winter night. The journey that began so ordinarily that night was about to reveal that the most important decisions in our lives don't always happen during grand moments. Sometimes they happen during a night shift at work, when you receive a seemingly simple task that will change everything. The hospital administration had finally made the decision to demolish the old West Wing, that historic part of the building constructed in 1890, which had already witnessed more than a century of human history. The impact of this decision was enormous. It meant physically erasing memories, stories, and energies that had inhabited those spaces for generations. And Tom was chosen to do the final inspection. "It's just a formality," they told him with that bureaucratic and indifferent tone that people in administrative positions usually use. "There hasn't been anything there for years. Just take a look, remove any objects that are still there, and tomorrow the machines will do the rest." They had no idea how wrong they were. They didn't know that behind the scenes of that seemingly mundane mission, an invisible web of connections was being woven, a revelation waiting to happen, an encounter ordained by destiny more than 7 decades ago. Tom grabbed his flashlight, his cleaning cart, his master keys that opened all the doors in that labyrinth of corridors, and began his descent into the unknown. With each step he took towards the abandoned West Block, a strange feeling grew within him, as if something ancestral were calling him, preparing him for a transformation he couldn't even imagine. And now you know Tom. You understand what kind of man he is, and you're ready to plunge with him into this experience that defies all logic. With a steady flashlight in his right hand and pushing his cleaning cart that creaked with every movement, Tom began his walk through the corridors of the West Block. The sound of the wheels echoed disturbingly in that absolute silence, as if announcing its presence to something that inhabited those shadows. The lights no longer worked. The electricity had been cut off years ago when they decided to abandon that wing. The yellowish beam of the flashlight was his only company, gradually revealing the vestiges of a past that refused to be completely forgotten. The smell of mold and abandonment permeated everything, that characteristic odor of places where time has stopped, where life has simply ceased to circulate. With each step, Tom observed the inner workings of what was once a bustling medical center. Empty rooms with half-open doors revealed rusty stretchers lying on the floor, wheelchairs covered in cobwebs that glistened when the flashlight shone on them. Medical records were scattered down the corridor like dry leaves in autumn, their yellowed papers telling stories of people who were no longer alive, diagnoses that no longer mattered, treatments that belonged to a completely different era of medicine. Everything was covered by a thick layer of dust that seemed to have accumulated for at least a decade, perhaps more. There was something profoundly melancholic about that scene, a hidden truth about how we treat our spaces of memory. Those corridors that had witnessed so many human transformations, so many life or death decisions, so many farewells and miracles, were now condemned to total oblivion. Tom felt the weight of this reality as he moved forward, as if each step was a silent tribute to all those souls who had passed through there. He wasn't superstitious, but there was something in the air that night that stirred his rational mind. An energy he couldn't explain, a calling that came from somewhere unknown. When he finally reached room 304, the last door at the end of that endless corridor, something completely unexpected happened. His flashlight, which had been working perfectly until that moment, began to flicker. Once, twice, 3 times. The light weakened as if fighting an invisible force trying to extinguish it completely. Tom stopped immediately, his heart racing. An inexplicable chill ran down his spine, starting at his feet and spreading throughout. His body like an icy wave defying the warm temperature of that winter night. It wasn't a physical cold, it was something deeper, visceral, as if his soul were reacting to a presence that his 5 senses couldn't fully perceive. He raised his flashlight to illuminate the sign on the door. It was faded, almost illegible, but it was still possible to decipher the words engraved decades ago. Waiting room, palliative care. Tom knew that term. Palliative care. The place where people came when there was no longer a cure possible, only comfort in their final days. A liminal space between existence and the unknown, where families said goodbye and patients made peace with their fate. The emotional impact of that place must have been immense in its active days, and now abandoned in the dark. It seemed to still carry all those emotions crystallized in time. Tom took a deep breath, trying to control the whirlwind of sensations that overwhelmed him. His trembling hand reached for the cold, rusty doorknob. For a brief second, he hesitated. Something inside him whispered that opening that door would change everything, that the simple decision to turn a doorknob would alter the course of his life in ways he couldn't even imagine. But Tom wasn't a man to back down. With determination, he turned the doorknob, which creaked loudly, breaking the sepulchral silence. The door slowly opened, revealing the absolute darkness inside. And it was at that very moment that everything changed forever. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the time to hit that button, because what's about to be revealed will touch your heart in a way you never imagined. You are as much a part of this story as I am, and every subscriber here is someone who believes in the power of human connections that transcend time and space. When the door finally opened completely and the beam of light from the flashlight flooded that space forgotten by time, Tom saw something that defied all his understanding of reality. The woman was there. It wasn't an illusion, not a trick of light or shadow. She was absolutely real, solid, present. Seated in an old chair beside the dusty window, through which the silvery light of the full moon streamed in, creating an almost mystical halo around her. She wore a completely faded blue hospital robe, the kind that hadn't been worn for decades, and her snow-white hair was styled in a delicate, perfectly arranged bun. Her wrinkled hands were clasped in her lap with serene elegance, as if she were meditating or praying silently. What impressed Tom most was not just the fact that she was there in that impossible place, but the expression on her face. She didn't seem scared. She showed no surprise or fear. There was a profound peace emanating from her, a tranquility that contrasted completely with the terror that gripped Tom at that moment. It was as if she were exactly where she should be, doing exactly what she should be doing. Tom stood, completely paralyzed in the doorway, his rational mind desperately trying to find a logical explanation for it. Perhaps she was a homeless woman who had found shelter there. But how could she have gotten past the security guards? How could she have survived years in that abandoned place without electricity, without water, without food? His voice trembling as much as his legs, Tom finally managed to articulate a few words. Who are you? How did you get in here?" The question came out, somewhat choked, laden with a mixture of fear and genuine curiosity. The woman turned her face completely toward him, and for the first time their eyes met directly. They were deep blue eyes, full of ancient wisdom, and in them Tom saw something that completely disarmed him, pure, unconditional compassion. She smiled gently, a smile that carried decades of patience and understanding, and answered in a soft but clear voice, "My name is Eleanor, Eleanor Whitmore, and I didn't come in, Tom. I never left." Those words struck Tom like a lightning bolt. He felt his legs tremble violently, his knees almost buckle. The implicit revelation in that simple sentence was impossible to process. But there was something even more disturbing. She had said his name. Tom. How did she know his name? He didn't wear a name tag, he hadn't introduced himself. No one knew he would be there that particular night conducting that inspection. The rational mindset he had built over 5 decades of life was being completely shattered piece by piece, word by word. The impact of that encounter was fundamentally altering his perception of reality. Trying to maintain some control over the situation, Tom stepped forward and said urgently, "You need to get out of here immediately. This building is going to be demolished tomorrow morning. The machines will tear everything down at dawn." He expected this information to cause panic, to make her get up and run, to break that surreal atmosphere. But Eleanor only shook her head slowly, like a patient teacher dealing with a student who hasn't yet grasped the most important lesson. "I know, Tom. I know perfectly well that this place will be destroyed tomorrow. That's exactly why you're here tonight. It's not a coincidence. None of this is by chance." She paused, her eyes piercing his soul in a way that made him feel completely exposed, as if she could read every thought, every doubt, every fear that inhabited his heart. Then she continued, "I've been waiting for a long time for someone who could truly hear me, see me, understand me, someone with a pure heart, without judgment, without haste, and that someone is you." Tom felt warm tears begin to form in the corners of his eyes without fully understanding why. At that moment, he didn't know if he was dreaming, if he had gone mad from working alone in those dark corridors, or if he was truly experiencing something that science could never explain. The hidden truth behind that encounter was only beginning to reveal itself, and Tom's journey of transformation was about to take him to emotional places he never imagined existed. Eleanor made a delicate gesture with her hand, indicating the empty chair beside her, inviting Tom to sit. He hesitated for a moment, but something about her presence was so comforting, so genuinely human, that he found himself slowly walking to the chair and settling in carefully, as if afraid of breaking that fragile and sacred moment. Dust rose as he sat, dancing in the moonlit air. Eleanor took a deep breath, and in a calm, soft voice that seemed to come from another era, she began to tell her story. "Tom, what I'm about to tell you may seem impossible, but every word is true. In 1952, I was only 28 years old. It was a different time, you know? The world was recovering from the war. People had hope for the future, simple but profound dreams. I was married to the love of my life, James Whitmore, and we had a young daughter, Sarah, who had just turned 3. She paused, as if gathering emotional strength to continue. Tom was completely absorbed, his breath held, every fiber of his being focused on the narrative unfolding before him. Eleanor continued, "That's when I received the diagnosis, a terminal illness. Back then, medicine didn't have the resources it has today. There were no miracle treatments, no hope of a cure. The doctors gave me a maximum of 6 months to live." Tears began to silently stream down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. At that time, Memorial Hospital was a benchmark in palliative care. They had a whole philosophy about dignity at the end of life, about making the last days peaceful instead of despair. That's when they brought me to this room 304, so I could spend my last moments in tranquility. Tom felt a lump in his throat. The emotional transformation taking place within him was profound. He was no longer just a janitor performing a bureaucratic task. He had become a witness to a love story that spanned decades. Eleanor pointed to a specific corner of the room, where there was another chair covered in dust and cobwebs. "My husband James visited me every day, without fail. He would sit in that exact chair over there and hold my hand for hours. Sometimes we would talk about happy memories. Sometimes we would just sit in silence, sharing each other's presence. He promised me something very important, Tom. He looked into my eyes and swore that he would never leave me alone, that he would be with me until the very last second, that I wouldn't have to face the passing alone." At that point, tears glistened openly in Tom's eyes. He felt no shame. Something profoundly sacred was happening in that forgotten space, a revelation about the nature of true love that we rarely witness in our hurried and superficial lives. Eleanor wiped her own tears with the back of her wrinkled hand and continued with impressive courage. Then came that December night. It was Christmas Eve, 1952. The snow was falling outside. I could see the flakes passing by the window illuminated by the streetlights. James was there, holding my hand as always. I felt my body growing weaker and weaker, my breathing becoming more difficult. I knew it was time. Her voice trembled slightly, but she persisted. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, and simply fell asleep. It was peaceful, painless, exactly as the doctors had promised. I fell asleep and never woke. Up again. Tom was about to ask how she ended up there, but Eleanor gently raised her hand, asking for patience. But do you know what happened next, Tom? Something even the doctors couldn't explain at the time. James was there holding my hand, even after my heart stopped beating. And then, a few minutes later, while the nurses rushed to attend to him, he had a massive heart attack. Right there, in front of me, even though I was no longer on this plane in the way we knew it. The impact of this revelation hit Tom like a giant wave. Eleanor looked directly into his eyes and concluded, "He died too, Tom. Right there, in this room, holding my hand." Our love story didn't end separately. It ended together, exactly as he had promised. We left this room together, this sacred space that witnessed the last act of devotion of our love. The hidden truth behind her presence there was beginning to make sense in a way that completely transcended rational logic, and Tom was about to discover that there were even more layers to this story, more revelations that would explain why Eleanor had remained there for so many decades, waiting. If this story is affecting you the way it affected me, you need to subscribe to this channel immediately. We're only halfway through this exciting journey, and what comes next will reveal the true purpose behind it all. After sharing that devastating revelation about how she and James had left together, Eleanor was silent for a few moments, as if gathering strength for the most important part of her narrative. Then, with surprisingly graceful movements for someone who looked over 100 years old, she slowly rose from her chair. Tom watched, fascinated, as she walked to the window, her silent steps on the dusty floor. The moonlight illuminated her profile, creating an almost ethereal image, as if she were made of both memory and matter. Eleanor placed her hand delicately on the dusty window pane, and without taking her eyes off the full moon, outside said something that would make the rest of the story finally make sense. "Tom, for 73 long years I've been trapped in this room, and I need you to understand something very important. It wasn't magic, it wasn't haunting or terrifying supernatural forces. It was something much more human, much more real." She turned to him, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of sadness and hope. It was a promise unfulfilled, a mission suspended between two worlds, waiting for the right moment, and the right person to finally be completed. The impact of this revelation began to take shape in Tom's mind. There was an emotional logic behind it all, a hidden truth about how love and duty can keep us trapped, even after everything else is gone. Eleanor pointed to a specific part of the wall, just behind the torn and faded curtain hanging from the window. James hid something there before he died, something precious that I had asked him to keep safe during my last lucid days. He promised to fulfill my last wish, but fate had other plans. Tom approached slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step he took toward that wall seemed to carry the weight of decades of expectation. Eleanor continued, "It's a letter, Tom. A letter I wrote with my last strength to our daughter, Sarah. She was only 3 years old when I died. A little girl who would barely remember my face, my smell, the sound of my voice. James wanted her to know how much I loved her. He wanted her to have something tangible of the mother she lost so young." Eleanor's voice trembled slightly as she added, "But he died before he could deliver it. The heart attack took him so quickly that the letter remained there, hidden in that crack, waiting for someone who could complete the journey he couldn't finish." Tom now stood before the wall. He carefully pushed aside the dusty curtain, revealing a small opening in the wall, a crack that had probably formed over time, or perhaps had always been there as a makeshift hiding place. His hands trembled as he reached into the dark, narrow space. For a moment he felt only cold air and dust, but then his fingers touched something solid, something made of paper. With extreme care, as if handling a sacred relic, Tom pulled the object out, It was an envelope, yellowed with age but surprisingly intact, sealed with red wax that still retained its original shape. The preservation of that envelope after so many decades was in itself a small miracle. Tom turned the envelope over and felt tears welling up in his eyes as he read the words handwritten in elegant feminine calligraphy. For Sarah, with all the love from Mom. Those simple words carried the weight of a maternal love that had endured for 7 decades, waiting to be delivered, a message frozen in time awaiting its recipient. Eleanor approached him, and for the first time, Tom could feel something emanating from her, an almost physical, but not quite material presence. She whispered with an urgency she hadn't shown until then. "She's still alive, Tom. Sarah Whitmore Chen. She got married, built a family, lived a full life, but always with an emptiness in her heart, for never having truly known her mother." Tom looked at Eleanor, his eyes wide. "She lives just 20 minutes from here in Brookline, and all these years she never knew this letter existed. She never knew I left a final message especially for her, words that could have changed how she saw her own story." The full revelation finally hit Tom with full force. He wasn't there by chance. This wasn't a bureaucratic end-of-shift task. He had been chosen, in some mysterious way, by the universe or destiny, to be the messenger who would complete a journey interrupted 73 years ago. The transformation he was experiencing at that moment went far beyond rational comprehension. It was a shift in his very mindset about what it meant to have purpose in life. Eleanor gently touched his arm and said, "This is why you're here, Tom. This is why I've waited. You have a pure heart, capable of understanding the sacred importance of this mission. You are the bridge that will finally allow a daughter to know her mother's last words of love." Tom held the envelope with both hands, as if he were holding the most precious thing in the universe, and in a way he was. His hands trembled visibly, not from fear, but from an overwhelming emotion that mixed responsibility, purpose, and a profound reverence for what that simple piece of paper represented. 73 years of waiting condensed into a few grams of yellowed paper and faded ink. A bridge between a mother and daughter, separated by death, but eternally connected by love. Tom looked at Eleanor with tear-filled eyes and asked in a choked voice, How can I be sure she'll receive this? How can I guarantee that after so much time, this letter will finally reach the right hands?" It was at that moment that something extraordinary happened. Eleanor reached out and gently touched Tom's shoulder. And for the first time since that impossible encounter began, he felt her touch. It wasn't cold, as we expect the touch of a spirit to be. It was soft, comforting, laden with a maternal tenderness that warmed something deep within his soul. That touch had weight, it had substance. It had real love, crystallized through the decades. Eleanor looked directly into his eyes, with an intensity that seemed to penetrate to the deepest layers of his being, and said, "Because you have a pure heart, Tom. Over all these years, so many people have passed through here before this place was officially abandoned. Administrators, doctors, nurses, security guards, other cleaning staff. But none of them were ready. None of them had the ability to see beyond the veil of the material world." She continued, her voice gaining a strength that contrasted with her frail appearance. "I specifically waited for someone like you, someone who wouldn't ignore an old lady sitting alone in an abandoned room, someone who wouldn't run away in terror, who wouldn't call it madness or a hallucination, someone who would care enough to listen, to understand, to act." Eleanor's words resonated with a profound truth that Tom felt in every cell of his body. The transformation that was happening within him at that moment was permanent and irreversible. His mindset about life, about purpose, about the meaning of existence, was being completely rebuilt. Tom wiped away the tears that streamed freely down his face without shame or embarrassment. There was something profoundly liberating in allowing that emotion to flow without restraint. In that moment of absolute clarity, he finally understood the hidden truth behind that impossible encounter. It wasn't about ghosts or supernatural mysteries. It wasn't about fearing the unknown or questioning the laws of physics. It was about something infinitely more important and more real than any paranormal phenomenon. It was about love in its purest and most transcendent form. It was about promises that survive physical death. It was about bringing closure to a story that had been suspended for decades, waiting for the exact moment and the right person to finally conclude it. It was about recognizing that we are all part of an invisible web of connections that spans time and space, linking lives in ways we rarely perceive in our hurried and superficial daily lives. The impact of this revelation fundamentally changed who Tom was as a person. He would no longer be the same man who had entered that room minutes before. With hands that were now firm and determined, he carefully placed the envelope inside the inner pocket of his jacket, close to his heart. That symbolic gesture represented much more than simply storing an object. It was a silent oath, a sacred commitment he was making. Tom looked directly at Eleanor, and, with a conviction that surprised even himself, declared aloud, "I will find Sarah. I promise you, Eleanor, that this letter will reach your daughter. No matter what I have to do, no matter how many doors I have to knock on, I will complete the mission that James couldn't finish. You haven't waited 73 years in vain." The words came from the depths of his soul, laden with a determination he had rarely felt in his entire life. It was as if all his experiences, all his decisions, all the paths he had traveled up to that moment had been preparation for that specific instant. Eleanor smiled, and it was the most radiant and genuine smile Tom had ever witnessed. It was a smile of profound relief, of infinite gratitude, of hope finally realized. And then something magical began to happen. For the first time in 73 years, a soft, golden, ethereal light began to envelop Eleanor. It wasn't the cold moonlight streaming through the window, but something different, something that seemed to come from within herself, or perhaps from a place beyond human comprehension. The light grew, gradually, becoming brighter but never blinding, always comforting and welcoming. Tom watched in wonder, knowing instinctively that he was witnessing something sacred, the beginning of a liberation that had been delayed for decades, waiting for that exact moment. If you feel that this story is transforming something within you just as it transformed Tom, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately, because you become part of this community of people who understand that life is so much more than what our eyes can see. Tom left room 304 in a kind of reverent trance, walking through the dark corridors of the West Block with automatic but determined steps. When he finally emerged from the abandoned building, the sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon. It was that magical hour between night and day, when the world seems suspended between two states of existence. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky with shades of pink, orange, and gold, as if the universe itself were celebrating what was about to happen. Tom realized with surprise that he hadn't slept at all that night, but he didn't feel tired. On the contrary, he felt a vital energy pulsing within him, a mental and emotional clarity he had never experienced before. The transformation that Eleanor had begun in him was complete. With the letter carefully tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his heart, Tom went straight to his car in the empty hospital parking lot. He didn't even go to the locker room to change clothes, nor did he inform his supervisors that he was leaving his shift. None of that mattered at that moment. He had a sacred mission to fulfill, and every second of delay felt like a betrayal of the trust Eleanor had placed in him. The interesting thing was that Eleanor had given him Sarah's address mentally, without uttering a word. In some inexplicable way, Tom simply knew where to go. The address was etched in his mind as if it had always been there. A cozy house in Brookline, not far from the hospital. It was as if the journey had already been mapped out in his soul before he even got into the car. During the 20-minute drive through the silent streets of Boston at dawn, Tom mentally rehearsed what he would say. How do you explain to someone that you spent the night talking to the spirit of their mother? How do you convey the magnitude of an impossible encounter without sounding completely crazy? But then he realized he didn't need to explain everything. The letter would speak for itself. His role wasn't to convince Sarah of anything, but simply to be the messenger who would fulfill a promise broken 73 years ago. The truth hidden in that yellowed envelope would be revelation enough. When he finally parked in front of the house, Tom stood for a moment, simply observing. It was a charming residence, with a well-kept garden, flowers on the porch, and delicate curtains on the windows. There was something deeply comforting in knowing that Sarah had built a beautiful life for herself, despite the early loss of her mother. But Tom could also feel, somehow intuitively, the emptiness that loss had left. He took a deep breath, checked for the 10th time that the envelope was still secure in his pocket, and got out of the car. His footsteps on the cobblestone path to the front door seemed to echo with a cosmic meaning. Each step brought him closer to the conclusion of a story that had begun decades before he was even born. With a slightly trembling hand, Tom rang the doorbell. The sound echoed inside the house, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. The door opened, revealing a grey-haired woman, appearing to be about 76 years old. She had gentle eyes, delicate features, and a posture that conveyed both strength and vulnerability. Tom immediately recognized something in her eyes. They were the same deep blue eyes he had seen in Eleanor. Genetics had run through generations, connecting mother and daughter through physical characteristics that time could not erase. The woman looked at Tom with polite but cautious curiosity, as anyone would when encountering a stranger at their door so early in the morning. "Can I help you?" she asked in a soft but slightly apprehensive voice. Tom swallowed hard, feeling the magnitude of the moment about to unfold. The impact of what he was about to say would change this woman's life in ways she couldn't imagine. "Are you Sarah Whitmore Chen?" he asked, his voice firmer than he expected. She nodded slowly, confusion growing on her face. "Yes, that's me, but do we know each other?" Tom felt tears welling up in his eyes again. "My name is Tom Morrison. I work at Boston Memorial Hospital in the West Block." He paused, searching for the right words. "And I have something your mother left for you many years ago." Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her eyes widened completely. Her hand flew to her mouth in a gesture of utter shock. "My mother," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But she died when I was only 3 years old. I never—" She couldn't finish the sentence, emotion choking her words. Tom could see decades of unresolved pain, unanswered questions, a void that had never been fully filled, all rising to the surface in that instant. The decisions she had made in life, the mindset she had developed, everything had been shaped by that early loss. And now, 73 years later, something she never imagined possible was about to happen. With hands that trembled as much as Sarah's, Tom carefully reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out the yellowed envelope. The paper seemed to glow softly in the morning light, as if it carried its own inner luminosity accumulated over decades of waiting. He extended the envelope to Sarah, and when she took it, their fingers touched briefly in a moment of profound human connection. Sarah held the envelope with both hands, as if it were the most fragile and precious thing in the universe. Her hands trembled violently, tears already streaming freely down her face, even before opening the envelope. She looked at the name written on the front, in that delicate, feminine handwriting. For Sarah, with all her love, Mom. 73 years of waiting condensed into those simple yet devastatingly powerful words. Sarah looked at Tom with questioning eyes, but he only nodded gently, encouraging her to continue. With trembling fingers and reverent care, she broke the red wax seal that had kept the letter closed for so long. The sound of the paper unfolding seemed to echo in the morning silence. Inside the envelope were 2 sheets of paper, handwritten in that same elegant and delicate calligraphy that belonged to a different era, when people still wrote letters with fountain pens and poured their souls onto the paper. Sarah began to read, and as her eyes scanned the words, her whole body began to tremble. The transformation happening within her at that moment was visible, palpable, as if decades of emotional wounds were finally being touched and healed. The letter read, "My dearest Sarah, my precious girl, my greatest treasure. If you are reading this, it means I couldn't watch you grow up. I couldn't be by your side during the important moments of your life. I couldn't dry your tears or celebrate your victories. And that is the deepest pain a mother can bear, knowing that she will not be present on the journey of the daughter she loves more than life itself. But I want you to know something that needs to be engraved in your heart forever. You are the greatest gift life has given me. Every moment I spent with you, from the day you were born until now, as I write these final words, was pure, unconditional love. Every smile of yours brightened my darkest days. Every hug of yours gave me strength to face what was to come. Sarah could barely continue reading through the tears that blurred her vision, but she persisted, each word penetrating deep layers of her soul that had been locked away for 7 decades. The letter continued. I know that growing up without a mother will be difficult. There will be times when you will miss me in ways you can't even express. But I need you to be strong, my daughter. Be kind to others and to yourself. Be happy. Allow yourself to experience complete joy without guilt. Live the life I couldn't live. And know that I will always be with you, not as a ghost haunting your past, but as a loving presence in everything that is beautiful. I will be in the wind that caresses your face, in the stars that illuminate your darkest nights, in every smile you give that will remind others of the goodness that exists in the world. With all my eternal love, with every fiber of my being, your mum who will never stop loving you, Eleanor. Sarah broke down completely in tears, her whole body shaking with deep sobs that came from a place she didn't even know existed within. These weren't tears of sadness alone, but of relief, of healing, of closure after a lifetime of unanswered questions. She leaned against the doorframe, her legs almost giving way under the emotional weight of the moment. I never knew, she managed to say between sobs. I never knew she had left something specifically for me. I've spent my whole life, 73 years, wondering if she thought of me in her final moments, if I was in her thoughts when she left, if she loved me enough to leave some mark of her existence for me. Tom felt his own heart break and rebuild itself at the same time. He stepped forward and, in a gesture of genuine compassion, gently took Sarah's hand. She thought of you, he said in a firm but emotional voice. Not only did she think of you, but she waited. She waited 73 long years for this message to reach you. She never forgot you, not for a second. And all of this, he pointed to the letter, is proof of a love that transcends death, time, and all the barriers we think exist between worlds. His words carried the weight of absolute truth, and Sarah could feel it in every cell of her body. In that moment of vulnerability and complete revelation, Sarah put down the letter for an instant and embraced Tom with a strength surprising for someone her age. It was an embrace of profound gratitude, of recognition, of emotional relief after a lifetime carrying an emptiness. She hugged him as if he were an angel sent specifically to heal the oldest and deepest wound of her soul. And perhaps in a mysterious and sacred way, he truly was exactly that at that moment. If you have tears in your eyes right now, just like I do while telling this story, then you need to subscribe to this channel immediately, because the final conclusion of this journey will reveal the true meaning behind it all. Tom spent almost 2 hours at Sarah's house that morning. They talked, cried together, and Tom recounted every detail of his encounter with Eleanor, even knowing it seemed completely impossible. But Sarah believed him. How could she not believe him when she held in her hands the physical proof of a love that had spanned 73 years? When he finally said goodbye, Tom knew he had changed that woman's life forever, just as Eleanor had changed his. He drove back to Memorial Hospital with a feeling of fulfillment he had never experienced before. The journey that had begun as a simple bureaucratic task had transformed into the most profound and meaningful experience of his entire existence. When he arrived at the hospital that afternoon, the scene had changed dramatically. The demolition machines were already in place, ready to physically erase more than a century of history. Tom parked his car a safe distance away and stood watching, leaning against the hood, his arms crossed over his chest. There was something deeply melancholic, but also necessary about that moment. The West Block had served its purpose. It had housed countless human stories, witnessed births and deaths, miraculous healings and painful farewells. And now, after delivering its last message through Tom, it was ready to rest. The machines began their work with a deafening roar of engines and metal against concrete. Tom watched as wall after wall was torn down, decades of memories being transformed into rubble. He was waiting for something specific, though he didn't know exactly what. And then finally came the moment when the great mechanical claw struck the outer wall of room 304. The impact was strong. Cracks spread through the old concrete like spiderwebs, and then that entire section of the wall crumbled in a cloud of dust and debris. It was at that exact moment that something absolutely magical and inexplicable happened, something Tom knew he would never forget for the rest of his life. A soft, golden light began to emerge from the rubble of room 304. It wasn't the reflection of the sun or any rational explanation anyone could offer. It was a light that seemed to have a life of its own, pulsing gently like a heart beating for the last time. The light slowly rose towards the clear blue sky of that afternoon, moving with the delicacy of a butterfly being released after spending its entire life trapped in a cocoon. Tom watched with tears streaming freely down his face as that golden light rose higher and higher, dancing gently in the breeze, carrying with it 73 years of waiting, of unconditional love, of promises finally fulfilled. He smiled through his tears, a smile of profound understanding and absolute peace. He knew exactly what he was witnessing. Eleanor was finally free. The hidden truth that Tom had discovered that extraordinary night wasn't about ghosts or paranormal phenomena. It was about something infinitely more real and powerful, the power of a promise kept, the transformative impact of a genuine act of kindness, the sacred importance of listening to someone who desperately needs to be heard. This story teaches us a profound lesson that many of us forget amidst the rush and superficiality of modern life. Sometimes we are placed in specific places at specific times. We meet specific people for a reason that goes far beyond coincidence or chance. There is an invisible web of connections and purposes weaving our lives in ways that we rarely perceive until something extraordinary happens and forces us to open our eyes. Tom Morrison was just a janitor, working another shift. An ordinary man without special powers, without social prominence, simply doing his job with dignity and dedication. But on that transformative night, he became something much greater. He became the bridge between the past and the present, between a mother and her daughter, separated by decades of silence, between a promise made in 1952 and its fulfillment in 2026. He became the instrument through which love proved to be stronger than death, more enduring than time, more real than any barrier we think exists between worlds. Tom's mindset changed completely after that night. He would never again see his work the same way, never again see himself as just an ordinary and insignificant person. He had learned that each of us has the potential to be a messenger of healing, an agent of transformation in the lives of others. And now Tom asks you a question, and I ask you one too. What promise can you keep today? What unspoken word do you finally need to express? What emotional letter are you carrying in your heart that needs to be delivered to someone before it's too late? What broken heart can you touch with a gesture of genuine kindness? Sometimes the decision to act, to care, to make a difference in someone's life is all that separates an ordinary story from an extraordinary one. If this story touched your heart and transformed something within you, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now, because you're part of this community of people who believe in the power of real human connections, and there are many more transformative stories waiting for you. You know, when I started researching this story about Tom and Eleanor, I didn't imagine how much it would affect me. And the fact that you've made it this far, to this exact moment, I know it affected you too. That's no coincidence. You were drawn to this narrative for some reason, perhaps because you too carry unfulfilled promises, unspoken words, or simply because your heart recognizes the truth when it appears before you. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, now is the perfect time to hit that red subscribe button below this video. Because this isn't just about telling stories, it's about creating a community of people who understand that life has much deeper layers than what we see on the surface. People like you, who have dedicated almost 15 minutes of your day to dive into this emotional journey with me. And look, I want to hear from you now. If this story truly touched your heart, if you felt that shiver, that tightness in your chest, if a few tears escaped your eyes while you watched, leave a comment below writing, "This message was for me." I read every comment personally, and when I see that specific phrase, I know we've connected on a deeper level. That motivates me to continue bringing you real and moving stories like this every week. And if you felt that connection, if that story was worth every second of your time, leave a sincere like on the video. It's not about numbers. It's about you telling me that we're on the right track, that this kind of content makes a difference in your life. Every like shows me that there are more people out there who need to hear these messages of hope, love, and purpose. Now, before you go, there's a video here that perfectly complements this topic. It's another true story that will show you how small gestures can have a huge impact on people's lives. Click on it and continue with me there, because the journey doesn't have to end here. Thank you for staying with me until the end. You are as much a part of this story as Tom, Eleanor, and Sarah. Until the next video.